Welcome to the second annual lecture of the Modern Asian Thought project, organized by the Interasia School, along with collaboration with other institutions. Interasia School was established in 2012 in Hong Kong, and to initiate interaction within different places in Asia. And currently we're running the Interasia School running two main projects. One is, as I just said, Modern Asian Thought, and the other one is West Heaven, which is the India-China Social Thought Dialogue. And this program, under the Modern Asian Thought project, the annual lecture, I think this is the second time. Last year in Okinawa, delivered by Professor Peck Na-chong, his friend. And this year, we are very, very pleased to have Professor Ashis Nandy with us. He just arrived last night. So he looks all right. I will introduce Zhang Songren, Johnson Chen first, and then he will introduce Ashis. Then the format will roughly run like this. Ashis will deliver his talk, and then the three discussants, our friends, will respond to what talk will be about, and then we'll have a open floor for discussion. That will be roughly the format. So we finish by 6, should be enough time. But before that, I have to acknowledge the support from various institutions, not only Interasia School, but National Science Council here, and Jiaotong University, especially the Graduate Institute of Social Research and Cultural Study, and the International Institute of Cultural Study under University System of Taiwan, and so on and so forth. And of course, I really thank all the staff and team to put these things together. Let me introduce my good friend, Zhang Songren, Johnson Chen. He is an internationally known art curator. And also, he has been running the hand art. At a certain moment, he was also operating in Taiwan for the past 30 years. Yes, and he's also visiting professor in Hangzhou's Chinese Academy of Art. Right? And we've been collaborating for several years. And I hope, I asked him to introduce Ashis. But actually, people coming for Ashis, don't really need introduction. But so Johnson has his own take, so we'll see how he. Right? So let's welcome Johnson Chen.
Thank you, Guangxi. Well, you all know what an impossible task it is to introduce Professor Nandy, because he's very complex, and you all know a lot of things about him. And it's even more difficult since even though I'm a friend and admirer, I do not know enough of his personal secrets to give an entertaining introduction. So I suppose in short, the important thing really about him is that he's been a public intellectual for 50 years, a social commentator, critic. He's been in and out of jail because of his political and social positions. And it is his great contribution to not just India, but to all of us interested in modern social ideas and intellectual world, is that he has been, for 50 years, from his position, he has been able to see the contemporary world perceptively. He's been able to think clearly and to speak beautifully and bravely, and about his insights. So for this, we all need to be grateful to him. Today, actually, you already have the title of this talk, which is called Memory Work. And it is, as I see it, is an eloquent defense of the past. But why? And of course, Professor Ashis has before been always been known for his position. This is another project about unraveling the mechanics of the hegemonic claim of modernity, which he has said before that there are we cannot honestly speak about multiple modernities because there's really only one such, and it is modernity in a European complexion. But for me, and I suppose for us all, another question is, why defend the subaltern? Why uphold something which seems to be doomed in existence and threatened by extinction in the modern world? And he tells us that the marginal may not be marginal at all, and like he says, the clue to diverse imagination of a desirable society is to play with multiple visions of the future, and this is what he's going to speak to us about. So we may be getting keys to some secret of a new future that is beyond the straitjacket of what we are familiar with, this cynical corporate world and the missionary nation states that we are that we have to deal with in the everyday world. So maybe DreamWorks is the big secret that was hidden in all of us that Ashis is going to expose for today. So thank you very much.
I joined the clap not because he was being nice about me, but to applaud the fact that both Johnson and Kwan Singh, according to me, represent a different kind of visionaries. I have been brought up in times when certain things, certain ideas were taken as sacred, sanctified, almost like the revealed words in scriptures. Times have changed. We are living in a different kind of world because where some of the problems we face today cannot be captured within the framework that has dominated the world today. To give you an instance, this is not in the paper. It is by way of an introduction. But I want to go back to that quickly. I just want to give one instance. If you look at the data on genocides in 20th century, which killed nearly 230 million people at a rough guess within 1 century, in this century which we have just passed, you will find that many of the causes that we shout horse on had played a very little role in it. Out of 335 million, less than 10 million died in religious conflict. But if you look at the data carefully, you will find that 2/3 of this 230 odd million killed died in the hands of their own states. And 2/3 of them died, if you look at it from another point of view, in the hands of secular states. Nationalism has killed many more people than the terrorists have killed. But we have no equipment to handle that. because we think nationalism is a necessary stage to one world, future world. Everybody has to go through that stage. We think a secular statecraft is the ultimate guarantee against oppression on grounds of faith. So there are these parts of the story too. And here today I take up issue, take up an area which we are known to all of us, but we have forgotten its implications. Let me put it that way. What I say, it has been said many times, not only here but everywhere, that I am a very controversial writer or researcher, whatever you want to call me. The fact of the matter is this, that what I write and affirm is known to everybody. But that is not something one should say in public. Because people suspect in the heart of hearts that what I am saying, they also say that, want to say that. And this temptation they have been fighting. Therefore they find me controversial. Everybody knows what I say. Everybody knows the data on genocide. Everybody knows that enormous numbers have been killed in the name of ideologies, many more in the name of ideologies, from nationalism to Nazism to Leninist Marxism. But nobody has like to say that, because that's not the fashionable thing to say. And so, anyway, so I now start with it. So here also you will find what I am saying is known. All right, let me start with an example here also. Everybody knows that they learn their first language, the mother tongue, not by learning the grammar, not by learning the spellings, or not by using cryptograms. They learn it only on the basis of memory and inner equipment, without any given tools of education or any pedagogic intervention. Mother tongue, you learn it from your mother. You learn it through an intimate relationship. And you know that no other language you will learn ever in your life again in the same way. Because you will be taught other languages. But you don't have to be taught your mother tongue. You pick it up just like that. And that's the work of memory. But nevertheless, we live in a world where civilization begins with writing, with literacy. And therefore, anything which is learned but doesn't look like being learned, which doesn't have textbooks, doesn't have notations in music, don't look like learning. This is what I am concentrating on today. I do so because there are cultures, particularly small cultures, small traditions, marginal cultures, marginalized traditions, which have no place for writing and literacy. Recently there was a controversy about one of the most famous playback singers in Indian film history. That singer died nearly 30 years ago. It was somebody accused another person of stealing from him, plagiarism. So the family had to come out and say that actually he was illiterate. Here was a person whose songs was being sung all over half the world, looked a very sophisticated man, sang very sophisticated songs, but was not literate. So the question of plagiarizing, stealing from his lyrics did not arise for him at least. He didn't write. This was only last year's story. You must have known that. This is Muhammad Rafi. So anyway, so that's the way it goes. But I am suggesting that this kind of cultures exist, this kind of communities exist, this kind of traditions exist, not only in the non-literate cultures, which the anthropologists study with great relish, but also within our kinds of culture. Some areas are not covered by literacy and cannot be covered by literacy. I also do this because, and here I begin with what I have written, that the primary job of collective memories, my main emphasis here is collective memory, in our times is not to supply an additional archive for historians, ensure social cohesion, or define national culture. For pursuing these lofty ideas, there are enough institutions and usually also an appreciative middle class to applaud, most countries. The shared memories which I talk about are the ones that protect vulnerable communities and cultures. A private, autonomous, inviolate space, relatively inviolate space, that cannot be easily violated, outside the domain of the state and outside authoritative, professional, historical constructions of the past. This space is less encumbered by ideological demands, political correctness, and reliable official empirical basis. That does not mean that this space is the domain of privileged truth. But it is the domain where privileged truths are contested, sometimes seriously, because we always have private spaces where we have doubts about some of the macro decisions which shape our lives. At the moment, after all the treaties, agreements, and checks on nuclear weaponry, we still have the capacity to kill every human being on the earth at least 15 times. Now, United States itself has the capacity now to kill everybody in the world 6 times. That's the claim. Now the question arises, why do you need 6 times the capacity? Once is good enough. You want to kill everybody itself. Once is good enough. But it has. So we all, in the heart of us, have our own suspicions. I am only articulating. This also is like to be controversial. These memories can be screen memories. Is a psychoanalytic term which simply means that these memories may not be always correct. Because memories get distorted, memories get reshaped, memories get forgotten, memories get edited, and so on and so forth. But then, these memories are expected to serve as checks on other memories, which are also screen memories. And these checks and counter checks of screen memories gives a multipolar world of memories within which we live. Such collective memories are a ledger on which a community or a culture writes its passions, respectable or seeming, fair or unfair, secret or open, for outsiders willing to read, cope with, and guard against. I have argued elsewhere that this is one of the pillars of the other cosmopolitanism with which some societies and communities in Asia and Africa have continued to live, and even parts of Europe might have at one time lived. I have tentatively called it Silk Route cosmopolitanism. It is a cosmopolitanism that can live with more radical diversities and host the otherness of others. Yep. Hosting the otherness of others, or not hosting the sameness of others. I do not like Johnson Chang because he conforms to my concept of what is good in a culture, what is bad, or what is the right way to live. I learn to cherish the very fact that he thinks other things are in, and not the ones I think. So I cherish the diversity itself, the otherness of others, rather than the sameness of others. In the dominant model of cosmopolitanism, it is assumed, because the dominant model is scaffolded by the values of the European Enlightenment of the 17th century. It teaches us to value the sameness, the values that Enlightenment itself upheld. Whereas I am talking about the kind of cosmopolitanism where you live with other cultures and other ideas, which are not only inconsistent with your ideas, but they directly challenge. I will give, if that time permits, I will give some examples of that. The autonomous space occupied by these often disowned, contraband or lost memories can be dredged for clues to diverse imaginations of a desirable society. And resistances, no, just a minute. Playing with multiple visions of the future and generating independent audits and resistances to the grand projects of ambitious missionary nation states and the corporate world in our times. If the paths of our plural futures run through our constructed past, as Bruno Latour seems to suppose, the defiance of official or sanctioned past is a vital part of that plurality. When institutionalized as a cultural form, these memories become what D. Venkat Rao in a recent book, which has just come out, D. Venkat Rao calls mnemocultural configurations, memory-based configurations, leading in turn to mnemocultural praxis, which survive even in the interstices and margins of many officially recognized literate text-based cultures as disowned stepchildren or poor cousins, and a standing embarrassment to a modern state, developed or developing, and the cultures of knowledge endorsed by the Enlightenment. Unlike Venkat Rao, however, I do not believe that the textual can successfully exile the memory-based, or the power relationship between the memory-based and the text-based is fixed. For more we try to marginalize memory-based knowledge or awareness or information, the deeper we push it down in our awareness. It is not given to us to self-consciously or purposely forget. It is part of our human nature, human personality. It is a psychological self. You cannot deliberately forget anything. That's not given to human beings. You cannot try. It's like counting one's breathing. To count your breath goes wrong. Normal breathing involves not counting. You try to count and you will find that you are stuck. Your breathing doesn't come normally anymore. There's so many things like that. I can go on giving examples. I mean, human beings cannot, this Freud said that. Human beings cannot imagine themselves dead. That is one fantasy of immortality. The source of the fantasy of immortality is this: human beings cannot imagine themselves dead. You try to imagine yourself dead, you are dead and lying there dead, but you are seeing it as a third person. You are seeing that yourself, that you are lying dead. So it is not given to us to imagine ourselves as dead. This is not biologically. So there are this kind of things. So this is one of them. You cannot deliberately forget. Forgetting happens. It cannot be therefore engineered. That is the basic argument here. That forgetting cannot be innate. And therefore people have memories. Because you cannot forget it, memories return and haunt you at uncomfortable moments. That survival of memories and return challenge our certitudes and self-definition and seek to redefine our collective self. We remain fearful and anxious when facing that threat, because it challenges even our fondest beliefs. We all know that our revealed sacred texts often come in mnemonic. And the culture of everyday life and our most intimate moments are memory intensive. We know the power of the memory. At this level, memories are where our experience, imagination, and values meet our fears, anxieties, and secret selves. In this one arena, the scales are not weighted in favor of the official, the authoritative, and the respectable. Seen thus, the main responsibility of memory is to be memory, and not for us to admit, for us to admit, in the well-known words of the Kashmiri poet Agha Sayyid Ali, your history gets in the way of my memory. This is the poet. your history gets in the way of my memory. I am everything you lost. You cannot forgive me. I am everything you lost. Your perfect enemy. Source of controversy is there because there is the awareness that those who are taking up the cause of collective memories as an alternative to history are posing a threat to our settled world. Collective memories, unfettered but tempered by individual ethics and whimsies and by the demands of everyday life, are a robust presence that refuses to fade away or be disciplined. They can be an alternative history of emotions, building blocks of visions, and can even be a form of social criticism, as for instance, when the past is deployed to critique contemporary politics, culturally or ethically. Memories can sometimes play the same role in a community that dreams play in a person. For memory work, like Sigmund Freud's idea of dream work, is an under-socialized, multi-layered affair. It too has its manifest and latent contents. It too mobilizes processes such as condensation, displacement, visualization, and secondary exhibition or level. And forget that, that's meant for the scholars. Each of these processes refracts and bends reality. But we are here talking of communities, not individuals. Over time, these distortions and overstretched readings become collective hermeneutic acts. Like dreams. As dreams tell you something, you learn how to interpret dreams. Similarly, memories distorted memories tell you something if you have learned or trained yourself to read in between lines. The world of hermeneutics is not egalitarian, and some cultural and intellectual traditions enjoy hermeneutic privileges that humbler traditions do not. That also is part of the story. It is only in the case of the southern hemisphere of the world that we have to, there are limits to hermeneutics. Otherwise it is limitless. So when Friedrich Engels says and Marx agrees that the conquest of Algeria by France was a great story and a good news, especially this word, good news, because now Algeria will be brought within civilization. But this will be seen as a minor aberration in otherwise glorious career. It will be explained away as a unfortunate reading of 19th century anthropological literature. That privilege is not given to African or Asian scholars. So we have to work with a different set of limits. I can produce this kind of quotes from a whole plethora of great thinkers, from Hegel and Immanuel Kant, all the way down to Jefferson and his democratic theory, so on and so forth. I don't want to go into that. Darwin and Karl Marx, all the way. But nobody notices this. They are not supposed to be noticed in the case of the great thinkers of the West. But in case of our thinkers, you have to explain why he didn't do this or why he said that. One false note invalidates them once for all. Okay, anyway, that's not the important part. Memory work corrects for that inequity, because it gives you the scope to privately retain another position, know what is wrong. memory work helps maintain a separate, private or secret ledger on which communities can write their sufferings that have not found voice in the public sphere and lowbrow subjectivities that embarrass their conventional cosmopolitan selves. These mnemonic records are framed by defined categories and associated with modes of analysis to which the dominant protocols of knowledge and reasoning have no access. I claim for memory work the same rights that Freud's idea of dream work enjoys. Memory work can lead us to the sources of a community's psychological health and provide clues to its creativity, but it can also sometimes underwrite shared violent fantasies and exaggerated sense of past injuries waiting to be avenged. But then, memory work can also prod communities towards cultivated, calibrated forgetfulness that comes not from failures of memory, but from what can be called principled forgetfulness. You sometimes choose to live life with anti-memories, as if you have forgotten the unforgettable, as if you have worked through your haunting experiences of genocide, uprooting, torture, and blood feuds. These are not only words I picked up randomly. These have come from my direct empirical experience while working on genocide. I have worked on this genocide that took place years ago in India, and also worked on comparative genocide for 15 years now. And I'm astonished in the way in which ordinary people, ordinary victims, people who have sometimes lost as many as 3/4 of their own families, what they have to say about the past. This is very, very moving. I will probably, in my time, I will come back to that also. In a study of mass violence that attended the birth of India and Pakistan in 1947, some survivors did not want to remember the times they remembered every day. That seems to be a contradiction. Some survivors did not want to remember the times they remembered every day. They believed that there were times when people had lost their humanity altogether, and like snakes and gods, the times would return if you remembered them. This is what one woman said. Others believed that at that time they had gone mad, and so had we. This is by a woman who had lost her whole family. And by the Sikhs who had butchered. So every night she used to wake up in her sleep and scream in her nightmares. The Sikhs are coming, the Sikhs are coming, they will butcher us all. And her granddaughter asked, she's a woman activist, at that time she was when she told me this. Just before she was dying, you must be very angry with the Sikhs, isn't it? And her grandmother said, no. At that time they have gone mad. So indeed, I am tempted to go further. Stephen Toulmin mentions towards the beginning of Cosmopolis. I think this is right. In any case, you have the script, so you take it up. All I am trying to say is this, that I hope the study of memory work will not merely lead to build us grand archives and museums of memories, as people are building, but also teach us to grant some dignity to communities that live by memory-dependent knowledge, art forms, and life support systems, and also force us to reassess intellectual projects that systematically ignore the entire range of apparently modest, disposable memory banks of the marginalized and the forgotten. Here too, an entire continent of human experience is waiting to be explored, and at least few dates to be debate. The Third Reich, Nazi Germany, offered an easy way of handling the situation, which I shall ignore for the moment, but I shall mention it nonetheless. More than a decade ago, in one of the Holocaust museums of the United States, I accidentally discovered at one corner a few charming small examples of craftsmanship. If I ornate combs, small mirrors, some charming lacework, handmade kitchenware and so on, all of which looked out of place in those green surroundings. Then I noticed the inscription that said that the artifacts were actually collected by the Nazis themselves. For a future museum of an extreme grace, they wanted to establish the museum. Once the final solution of the Jewish problem had been enforced. So this is very, very grim and very nasty because Nazi Germany is did it. But you will find even in our very civilized governments and regimes that this is not something unknown. I mean, many of our governments and regimes, our rulers, would be delighted if some of the indigenous people and groups quit the stage. Then they can build a lovely museum in their honor at the center of the city, to which tourists will flock as a great cultural achievement. So on so forth. Museum as well. And this is a normal story. Mexican culture lives much better in the museum at Mexico City than outside. But that's the way. Museumization is a very natural way of handling the situation. Everybody would like them to do that. I mean, from our own countries, we can give examples of that kind. What's up are cultural memories that seem to represent resistance to the mega project of modern nation states? Ideologies of progress, development, national security, and monolithic ideas of national identity. They include memories that defy history and its disciplinary conventions. I do not reject the idea of oral history, but I reject its pretensions to being the final destination of refurbished or restored memories that have not been captured in text and audiovisual records. I believe that the totality of the experience of sustaining and transmitting memories over generations in all its emotional richness and filigree details is better captured in the humble algorithm of everyday life in cultures and communities that have learned to live in peace with the mnemonic. That is the way life has gone on, and cultural continuity ensured in the backyards of the world. Neither that mnemocultural praxis nor its distinctive way of reproducing itself owes any obligation to history or to the institution of museums. After the major ideologies that have ensured the death of a significant proportion of humankind, after the decline in the fate of these killer ideologies, now development has chosen to wear the garb of a new faith, to call for fresh blood sacrifices. And indeed, millions of lives and thousands of lives have already been sacrificed for it, without as much as an apology. In India, the estimated number of people displaced due to development is roughly 60 million, and that figure is nearly 10 years old. 60 million. This is 3 times the figure of total people, number of people displaced during the partition of India in its first question. 20 years. We cannot even mourn such losses. We are told it is a form, because we are told that it is a form of romantic nostalgia, no better than a deadly epidemic. Memories are under attack in many ways. Accordingly, acceptable memory visions of a desirable society can now be located only in the future, though at one time they could be located both in the past and the future. In the garden of the concept of a past, which also represents the future. We can no longer enter the future through the past, whatever Latin might say. That exchange play with the past strand. And decide law. Let me give a little more concrete examples so that people do not choose. Memory work does not have to accept culture as consumable or reducible to cuisine, plastic arts, events on proscenium stage, music, tourist sites, ethnographic accounts, and museums. This is the standardized ways in managing and taming cultures. Memory work fits memories into the non-heroic rhythm of everyday life so that they are not erased. Michio Araki, a Japanese scholar of popular religion, used to claim that the Japanese past has been so efficiently historicized and given a teleological thrust that there was a now near total consensus that Japan's past was inexorably moving towards a developed modern Japan. Only in Japan's popular religion was there the shadow of a more open-ended past. That open-ended past, Araki believed, had become an inaccessible contraband past, but it was not entirely lost. Collective memories are being engineered and dismantled around all of us. Anyway, let us not forget what memories are being destroyed not only by the dedicated external enemies, by imperious power-drunk despots, or arrogant social engineers eager to wipe clean the imperfect landscapes of mind, but also by well-meaning nation-state and liberal democratic dispensations. Entire sections of people in many parts of the world are being redefined as obsolete or redundant. The three great peasantries of the world, the Russian, the Chinese, and the Indian, which looked fiercely independent, resilient, and immovable only a century ago, are now supine, pliant, and permanently dependent on experts, policymakers, global market, and multinational corporations. Their back broken, their self-confidence wiped out. Do the hundreds of little cultures they have spawned and nurtured over the centuries have any future? I doubt it. In India, till 2009, that is 5-year-old data, about 250,000 farmers have committed suicide in the previous 2 decades. The data released by the Indian National Crime Bureau shows that a huge majority of the suicides take place not in the poverty-stricken parts of India, but where growth rates have been high and agriculture has been modernized and exposed more to globalization. So the peasants are committing suicide in response to the fact that they have lost agency and control over their lives, that they are entirely dependent on the bureaucracy, on politicians, scientists, and laboratories, and the various kind of products they make, and they make what life and so on. So, can memories be made to sing again? I come to that. Can memories be made to sing again? Not officially sponsored or subsidized memories, mobilized for routine politics and statecraft, but the humbler ones, reflecting the creativity of everyday life and the possibilities opened up by arts, music, crafts, and partly mnemonic traditions of healing and agronomy, independent, irreverent, and defiant. Let me give an example. I regain hope when I see the trajectory of the two main schools of Indian classical music during the last 65 years. During the period, persistent attempts have been made to formalize these traditions and make them more teachable in modern institutions. Nearly 60 universities now give degrees in music. You can now get a doctorate in Indian music from a whole range of respectable universities and become a proper musicologist and music critic. But till now, in the last 65 years, none of these universities has produced a single great performing artist or composer. A few who seem to defy this summary judgment maintain double ledgers. They proudly source their musicology to their university education, their music to personal gurus and mnemonic training. That means training is entirely by mnemonic. Many a times the teacher is illiterate. The last 6 decades have seen a remarkable expansion of the reach of Indian classical music, both within and outside the borders of India. We have left behind the times when Arturo Toscanini, the famous Italian conductor, could publicly proclaim with contempt that Indian music was no music at all, for the Indian musicians did not know where to begin and where to stop. Even Max Muller, who spent his whole life studying India, could openly say to an Indian friend, Rabindranath Tagore, Tagore's grandfather, that he found in Indian music no melody, no harmony, and no rhythm. Indian music has survived and has remained as memory dependent as it always has been. The great singers, instrumentalists, composers, and teachers have all acted like living libraries and walking universities. They have mnemonically passed their knowledge to their students and experimented with new ragas, musical forms, and even technology of musical instruments. Even that without any text written or otherwise. Many of their students are well educated, but when learning from their gurus, they learn to give primacy to the mnemonic. The oral culture that has grown around this knowledge system has been both cumulative and inclusive. Indian classical music has proved its resilience and self-confidence. Other memory-intensive cultural products have not been so fortunate. Obscure healing systems of many tribes and castes, craft traditions and schools of art of small communities, even crop diversity and eco-sensitive viable agronomies that fail to compete with multinational corporations in the short run, they all face extinction today as libraries of human creativity, self-expression, and intellectual adventure. The musical traditions and art forms that show signs of life are exceptions, not the rule. Let me end with an example that makes the same point at a more humble scale and can be read as an unintended ballad on inglorious obscurity, uncertain future, and unsung death. Anthropologist Stephen Thomas, in his book, The Last Navigator, speaks of a culture not backed by a billion people, but by a small group of surviving traditional navigators in Satava, a remote island in South Pacific. He apprenticed himself to one of them some 30 years ago as part of his field work. Thomas learned how this ancient mariner, Mau Pialu, sensitively read the currents of water, waves, winds, and clouds. The moving landscape of the islands, the changing colors of the ocean, the sky, and the positions of the sun, the moon, and other stars and planets, flights of birds, movements of shoals of fish, floating flora, and myriad such variables. These were the skills that had allowed Piailuk's ancestors to cross the formidable, irascible Pacific Ocean to settle down in the various islands 6,000 years ago and to move from island to island over the centuries. I am sure modern navigation technology has made the aging master terribly obsolete. But what about the hugely sensitive mix of a massive range of empirical observations and cognitive skills, the ones that are entered into an enormous, informal, invisible, multivariate matrix in one's mind for an intuitive factor analysis by a trained navigator negotiating an unruly ocean? What kind of memory work does it involve? Does Piailuk's memory have something to tell us about the range and possibilities of human cognitive skill? Does it challenge our criteria of deciding which memory should be protected from posterity and which can be safely allowed to die? Do we really have the right to an eugenics of memories and claim, in the manner of the Third Reich, the right to destroy memories unworthy of memories? All this is not an attempt to undervalue projects concerned with the project protection and recovery of cultural heritage intertwined with textuality. Those who have seen the documentaries and photographs of devastation to which cities such as Dresden, Warsaw, Tokyo, Nanking, Hiroshima and Baghdad have stood witness can guess the enormity of cultural loss many societies have to live with. These traumatizing losses do require an emphasis on cultural resources, libraries, archives and manuscripts, sculptures, murals and paintings, architectural works and artisan craft, all that can be retrieved, reconstructed, catalogued, restored and saved from oblivion. They are repositories of a way of life, intellectual tradition and distinct styles of human creativity. Humanity itself is diminished by that loss. I am humbled by the efforts that have been made to protect what has fortunately survived organized vandalism and deliberate ethnocide. However, I do believe that victim of societies, if not perhaps of nation states, imposes responsibilities on the victims once they have emerged empowered and triumphant from their ordeal. A society truly rises above its suffering only when it tries to be not merely a symbol of its own suffering, but also that of all others who have undergone similar suffering. I am willing to invert the proposition to make it stronger. No community can claim a unique chosen status unless it self-consciously abjures its chosen status and is willing to stand witness to the suffering of all other communities that have suffered from the same kind of violence. Ironwork. Attempts to see the suffering of a people as the marker of a chosen status or as a sign of the rest of the world ganging up against them is to trivialize the experience of suffering. The Israeli state, many believe, is a prime instance of this. I hope that the effort to protect memories will not force us to meekly accept the obsolescence of Mao Piailuk, the Potchitrakas of Bengal, the tattered cultures of the gypsies in Europe, the non-culture of the non-people called Palestinians, Arabs, and others like them, who emerge from the sundry little cultures of the world and work on unknown corners of human knowledge, imagination, and memory. They also are part of everyone's cultural heritage. How to understand, revalue, and protect living memory banks? There is no easy answer to it. However, one must at least be bold enough to affirm that some skills and some vocations are more heavily memory dependent and require long face-to-face intense interactions between the recognized carriers of knowledge and their chosen apprentices or students. Written texts, scores and digitalized records do not do full justice to them, and to appreciate their hidden grandeur, one must look at them in their own terms. When one does so, it does not diminish the importance of cultural artifacts and past one is trying to save from oblivion, but gives depth to the enterprise and enhances its ethical significance. Paying homage to human creativity preserved in alien forms of memory work is granting dignity to our own unexplored selves and our non-actualized potentiality. Thank you very much for your support.
Maybe I introduce Professor Hui Yuebing and Marie first. Hui Yuebing has been working together with us for a long, long time. She's now teaching in Nanyang Tech University, right? Yeah, Technology University. In the Chinese department. Her field is actually intellectual thought. She's also running different research projects, including, I think my guess is she may have something in mind with the communists in Malaya, but I don't know. So it will be interesting. And Hilma Fari is with the University of Indonesia, with the Cultural Study program. Hilma has been an activist, critical intellectual for a long time. And he also had tremendous experience with 1965 massacre. I think reading this maybe has something in mind along those lines. I don't know. So we'll move through. Yuebing will go first. Yes, you have 20-25 minutes each. Yeah. Okay. Let's welcome.
Thanks, Guangxing, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Guangxing and the summer school for inviting me to be one of the discussants responding to Ashis Nandy's paper. I'm happy to exchange my thoughts with all of you here. This is actually my second time responding to Nandy's paper. Every time I'm actually like skating on thin ice. I have to be really careful, but at the same time, really looking forward to it. The topic of Nandy's paper is very straightforward. It sets out to read the problematic memory work, exploring its multiplicity and complicated references. It is like walking through a dense forest. You will discover many secret pathways and signs. They are intricate, but at the same time, independence and interdependence. Memories are part of our daily lives. They are active factors within our deep consciousness. They do not work like computer operating systems, which only save and archive. Although they also have the function and form of archiving, they save, I name it as a consciousness metric, which governs humans' activity in terms of spirituality, feelings, cognition, and judgment, and subjected to the political, social, and cultural context. What strikes me amazingly is the way Nandy unfolding the psychoanalytic approach, which he is good at, on how to access to knowledge system of memory work, in which he throws out many important questions such as, firstly, what kind of knowledge system is memory? What are the cultural forms and structures of memories, which also involve the language problem as central in the construction progress? How do we categorize, manage, and analyze memory? Secondly, what are the relationships between memory and modern states, development, and developing countries? I would like to share my views from these two aspects, especially on the notion of memory construction and fictionalization. Firstly, the intellectual question related to memory of self and collective self. I would like to talk about what I learned a few days ago. Last week, I went to Jinzhe, Shanghai, to attend a private section held by Modern Asian Talk Project Tokyo office. The topic of the meeting is National Feeling and International Feeling under East Asian Crisis. We talk about self and other, about definition, multiplicity, interaction with different experiences, and about looking for a way to think out for binary oppositions. During the meeting, Nandy's idea of multiplied self became the highlight of our discussion. Professor Lau Weng-sung from Hong Kong Lina University has responded to Nandy's idea in the following sentence. The so-called self is not a given and unchanging self. Instead, it is a self that embarrasses internal division and possible multiplicities. On the other hand, the so-called other is also not a given and unified other. In fact, way before the self and the other met each other, they have already been mutually constructed in imagination. The reason why I think of Professor Lau's works is because of that Nandy's idea of collective memories and shared memories suggested in the paper is similarly a way of refining collective self. In other words, memories are a medium or agency to construct any kind of selves. They are divided into national self, collective self, and other various forms, as they are completely manipulated by memory work and by the way of constructing others. In most cases, memories are closely linking to recognitions, identity, and historical construction. Memories can also be seen as critical insight or resistant consciousness, as they help gather proper self-feeling or self-consciousness when people facing unjust historical narratives. However, if we need to construct collective memory or local memories collectively, a particular kind of local discourse and the ritualistic cultural narrative become utmost important. Please allow me to explain what I mean about the local discourse. Local discourse refers to the local's interpretations to local objects, and it usually becomes prevailing way of accounting and viewing things. It bears the heavy responsibility of inheriting local memories, possessing the cultural function to repair false memories, and is being taken as a representation of a local tradition. Divergence in tradition, it seems that records are the only historically accepted evidence, but from the anthropological point of view, memories serve as equally important information in terms of reconstructing past, as they themselves are important cultural choice. Let me give one example here. Folk culture scholar Zhao Siyi once mentioned about the folklore 太阳经, Book of Sun, in his essay, The Birthday of Sun, Southeast Coast Historical Memory of Emperor Zhongzhen. According to the Book of Sun, March 19 is the birthday of Sun God. But in fact, the book was edited by Emperor Zhongzhen's third daughter. So the sake of mourning his father's death and the ruin of the empire, she claims for Sun's birthday in order to hide the truth from the Qing emperors. In the southeast coastal region, the folklore has been transformed into a symbolic asset endowed with historical memories. But when it's spread to different regions, the symbol of March 19 will connect with the local social history and be very into different form of local discourse. And in post-colonial experience, when daily memory are connected with local discourse, the imagination and building of heroic character has been a common practice. As memories become the recognition of identity, then can resort to. For example, in Borneo, East Malaysia, there is a gold mining town called Bau, Singlongmen pronunciation in Chinese, where the Chinese settlers were based during the British colonial periods under the rule of James Broad. The Chinese workers were exploited by the British gold mining company, and it finally led to workers' revolution. During that time, a person named Liu Sangbang was characterized as an anti-colonial hero in the local memory story. He was even defined as a protecting god in the area of Siniawan. Siniawan is a small town in Kuching, located in East Malaysia. It is not uncommon in many places that human characters are deified as God. But in this place, Siniawan, the transformation also involves the resistance to colonial history and the psychological need of an anti-colonial hero. The images of Liu Sangbang was put together by the inheritage of local folklores. That means the entire process and outcomes obviously different from what historians gather from colonial archives or general historical document. For them, Liu Sangbang is merely a fictional character in memory. The story of Sun God and Liu Sangbang show us the construction of memory do involve the images of myths or the internalization of religion, and they are supported by pattern of local discourse and narratives. Meanwhile, we will understand in the matter of memory construction and fictionalization, if we recognize memory inherited by memory, where we put together cohesively as a mnemonic symbol, the memory of self will then belong to the collective, and they become parts of the collective self. And for the second part of my response, I would like to deal with the issue of memory, failure, violence, and nation. It touched me very much when Nandy quoted George Orwell in his essay and say, memory management is a crucial part of a modern statecraft. How do we choose a mnemonic model, and how do we put it into the structure of society? It actually involves the process of contention and selection. In a post-colonial society, there are many stories of resistance during the process of historicization, and they are usually accompanied with heavy trauma and the demand for historical justice. However, the firewall that is built by mnemonic trauma does not necessarily bear the force from outside. And we normally see the contention of social memory as contention between the authority and the grassroots. In fact, this could be one of the factors, but we should not neglect the psychological suppression that is constructed by fear, unease, anxiety, and also uncertainty. I think there are also key factors of building the firewall. After, although memory seems to be pointing now here, the mnemonics model and cognitive pattern, in fact, are controlled by the enemy that we recognize and shape in our heart. In the historical context of colonialism and anti-imperialism in Singapore and Malaysia, the memories of revolution are the memories of a red symbol. That is the revolutionary memories of the Malayan communists. Whether they are in written record, oral history, or fictional works, we should tie them together in the mnemonic network. For example, the configuration of jungle and hunger, or love and desire. Sometimes the revolutionary memory are internalized through literary fiction, and the fiction allows to pray into the mental state of the revolutionists. For example, literary narratives are also a way of constructing memory in a broad sense. In a short story that titled Memorandum of the People's Republic of Malaya, which was published recently, it showed the problematic issue of memories in a psychoanalytic way. The story talks about the life of a communist fighter, Lao Jin, who returns to his hometown after 40 years of struggle in the jungle. He never contacted other comrades since his return, but after 15 years, he was found dead neatly in a tree hole with pungent smell of his rotting body, flies surrounding his corpse. A local newspaper reported that well-known communists died bizarrely in hometown street. This precisely witnessing the absurd and decaying image of death of a communist fighter. The decaying body of Lao Jin is somehow related to his collapsing mental state after walking out of the jungle. His revolutionary dream, Paris, the utopia, vanished. He can only face with his past directly. In the story, Lao Jin always immersed himself into the lost feeling of failure. He was always preoccupied, especially during the post-independence period of 20 years. He became very anxious. Malaya has gained independence. What should we fight for? For the dignity of Malayan communists, for the recognition in history. At the same time, Lao Jin wrote an unrealistic utopian novel with heavy defeatist sentiment titled a record of the People's Republic of Malaya. So he was criticized severely for it. This survey of Malayan communists shows the peeling off of self from the collective. How do we recall the defeated better and face the painful reality? Literary fiction speaks for the superstitious accounts, exploring the most original things in memories. But when self is separated from the collective, self-memories have nothing to rely on. What's followed in the faster withering of mentality, if compared to its physical body, unexpectedly, a fictional narrative actually brings the compensation of memory into effect. At the last, I would like to talk about the memories of violence. In a society that celebrates multi-ethnic and multicultural history, as well as living experience such as Malaysia, we not only need to construct collective selves by virtue of the collective of common memories, but also require another kind of ethnic self, which would help liberate the trauma of or shame that one ethnic group bears, especially when the state interferes in people's memory in order to decide the cognitive way of seeing the past. The racial conflict occurred on May 13, 1969, have been a mnemonic predicaments for all ethnic groups in Malaysia. Until now, the rights of interpreting the memories are still at the hands of the authoritative power. I once interviewed a witness of May 13 for the first time in Hong Kong. He was a young French teacher working at the Alliance France Cars Malaysia during the 60s. On May 13, he finished his classes at the center and walked out with his student. Suddenly, he saw one of his Chinese students was injured by a bamboo weapon. He later went on the street with a list of his student name in hand, trying to make sure if they are safe. He recalled, "I saw fire." A few concise but powerful words in which we are led back to the burning scenes. Historian Eric Hobsbawm once reminded that under the circumstances of preceding problems and expectation, people usually look for what they want to find in memory, but not going through the entire historical memories, especially when the part of history is misunderstood or is covered by the authority. They are only information. Hobsbawm warns, and that oral historians should try their best to avoid. How strongly Hobsbawm's warning is. However, I would like to say no history can survive without memories and experiences, and that is what makes the memory work so important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Guan Xing, and also Summer School for having me here, inviting me and giving the opportunity to respond to Professor Nandy's presentation. And the presentation itself speaks directly to my own experience. I've been involved in a large oral history project in Indonesia, which collects interviews with hundreds of people, former radical activists in the 1960s who were later imprisoned under the New Order regime. Some or many of them were imprisoned for 14 years without trial, so they have a lot of these disheartening stories about their experience during that period. And what we did was to collect initially only stories about their sufferings. And that was the intention, to complete or to collect additional information in order to construct an alternative version of history. So on one hand, you have the official version, which says that the events in 1965 on October 1st was a communist plot, and the New Order came to rescue the Indonesian people from communism. In a similar vein, I think here, if you remember, the events of February 28, 1947, which starts a long period of authoritarian rule in Taiwan. A bit of the history first before I continue. So on October 1st, in 1965, 6 army generals were abducted from their homes and later killed. The army version was that they were killed by soldiers who were under the influence of Indonesian communists. Basically, they will say that they were abducted and the communists are responsible for that, and that's why we have to retaliate against the communists and then wipe them out of the political stage altogether. So the campaign against the communists started in October 1965 and lasted for 3 years at least, during which more than 500,000 people were killed, tens of thousands were imprisoned, scattered all around Indonesia. Many of them stayed in prison until 1998. Many of them died in prison, and it also affected like millions of their families. So children of these communists or alleged communists were difficult to find jobs, yeah, and all these problems. So this is a bit of the history. So the initial aim of the oral history project was to provide alternative sources for historians to write more inclusive histories. So while before the official history excluded all of these little stories about experience of suffering, now we want to include that and try to bring it to schools so students in schools would get some knowledge about what happened in the past. Because it was huge. I mean, in terms of the impact that it has, it was similar to the Cambodian massacre. But while everyone, at least in the West, there was a lot of protest against the Cambodian massacre, nothing was heard about the Indonesian massacre. So this is what we want to restore the historical records so that a lot of other people, younger Indonesians, would be able to know a bit about their own history. So it was also meant to represent the voices of the victims against the deliberate strategy of silencing by the regime. So it started with what Professor Nandy refers to a lofty and venerable goal indeed. But we soon found out that the issue was much more complicated than simply providing an alternative to the state narrative. The first problem was around the issue of what and who to record, by whom and for what purpose. Yeah. When you began the whole project, it was simple. You find the victims who was imprisoned, go and interview, whatever experience they have, put it on record, and then you have the source. But as soon as we began that process, we noticed that this was not easy. It's easier thought than done. Because once you enter the house of a victim and their families, all the complicated situation will come forward. Like the son may not like his father or mother to be interviewed. And there are cases where fathers actually hid their identity from their children for many, many years. So it was much more than simply digging into the past, getting information and put it on record. No? It involves a very complex set of social relationships as well. So that was the first set of problem. Yeah? And it also challenged our notion, our understanding of relatively stable notions of human rights. What constitute human rights violations? For example, if you say that this or that person was killed by the state, it is clearly a violation of human rights, the very basic rights to life. But how about the widows of these people who were not able to raise their 5 kids by themselves under constant intimidation, repression for many, many years, and they suffered a lot. But this was not in the category of human rights violation. If you use Euridocs, you will not find it. And there are hundreds of detailed categories of human rights violations. It doesn't exist. So we have to find the solution to the problem somewhere else. It's not in human rights, it's not in the standard conventional writing of history. You have to find it somewhere else. So this is one of the issues that we confronted from the very beginning of the project, and it's still going on. The debate is still going on. The deeper you go, the more you will find, and the more you will realize that this is a very complex situation that you are dealing with. And there is the limitation of languages, the limitation of conceptual framework, concepts, etc., etc. There's a thing Professor Nandy has raised and addressed very eloquently. Another example is the whole question about who is a victim and the idea of victimhood itself. It has been contested, especially when it comes to issue of reparation and compensation. This is another. The economics of victimhood is also a very complex issue, especially now, when there are possibilities that the violent past can be addressed by the state. So once that comes up, then all these issues about, I was a victim too, and all these claims made by different groups in different situations will emerge. And this is also a situation where we, and it's clear, I mean, it's not only in Indonesia, I think it happened in Rwanda, it happened in all different situations and societies who endured severe human rights violations. They have similar issues as well. The conclusion is that we had at that time is that the conceptual framework is insufficient to handle this experience. Memory of the victims is not singular and should not be treated so. New set of concepts and language to deal with the complex of experience, fears, and memories were needed. The second set of problems is about knowledge production. So once you have all this information about what happened in the past, what are you going to do with it? Yeah. We have published a book, a collection of essays based on those oral interviews about different aspects of the violence, etc., etc. Some other people have done excellent academic work on all these like different aspects. Have written books about prison, about the experience of torture, etc. And of course, the noble idea behind these projects was, of course, to inform people who did not experience the 1960s or that period about what happened. But it soon also became clear that that was problematic too. It was very helpful in bringing repressed narratives back into historical writing and challenge the official history of the regime. But it also has limitations because of its focus on challenging the dominant, which absorbs the oral history into that framework, while ignoring the possibility and the need to create what Professor Nandy calls the separate, private, and strict ledger on which the communities write their sufferings. So once you collect all this information, this is interesting during the interaction that I had with some of these people, is that what are you going to do? Are you going to publish this? And if you do publish it, what is going to happen to them? Will it go to through a legal process? So all these expectations, hopes, and during this process makes us realize that there cannot be a single sort of way of dealing with this issue. You need diverse like tactics, strategies, and also methods of dealing with this. And this is not only an ethical question of doing justice to repressed narratives, it also has theoretical and political consequences. Professor Nandy here raised the issue of mnemonic knowledge in the construction of histories. What oral history does at its best is to select useful information from interviews or to tune memories into objects of study as social phenomena, of which the Italian Alessandro Portelli is a great example. His study about the death of Luigi Trastelli is very excellent in this regard. In official history, of course, all these memories would be abandoned altogether. No? There's no place for them. Professor Nandy suggests that we need new categories and concepts because the dominant protocols of knowledge and reasoning have no access to that kind of knowledge. So we need something else. Academic work itself is limited. Psychoanalysis may help you to make the first steps, but then you have a lot of range of other issues to grapple with. But this means not simply to have sharper analytical tools to separate useful from useless information, but to create a conceptual framework that would be able to deal with different, contradictory memories as a dynamic whole, as opposed to this Lacanian notion of totality, as a dynamic whole, as a whole, but not totality that would reduce the experience to a singular idea. Professor Nandy then refers to Freudian psychoanalysis, particularly the idea of dream work, and looks at the possibility of employing the methods of analyzing and understanding individual dreams in the study of memory of communities into what he calls memory work. So you have dream work for individuals and you have memory work for these communities. And like Freud's dream workers, these are people who study dreams. Yeah? Like these dream workers, the memory workers here observes different signs of memory in a community. Could be oral interview, could be visual objects, or sounds, etc. And this is the important point, interacts with the community instead of simply telling the people this is what happened and you can take the lessons from the past. So you interact, like the dream workers interact with the people who have dreams, the memory workers interact with the people or the community that has this memory. And this is the major difference between memory workers and professional historians, so to say. The historians will take all the information, write it on his desk, publish a book, and forget about it. Yeah? Or make a career, probably, out of it, if he's lucky. In my own experience, this is where the historian or scholar is encouraged to collaborate with art and activism. There have been numerous of such projects in Asia. And this is a great example. Yeah? The map. What is it called again? The map of, here. The incarceration map of Taipei. Yeah? We actually made a similar map in the city of Solo. So you have different, like similar projects all over Asia. Yeah? And not necessarily providing like simple information, this is what happened, but also to invite people to get engaged with all these issues. And I think art and activism here is important because they have that kind of language that scholarly, what you call that, endeavors do not have, where the limitations of the scholarly and academic work are actually overcome. Yeah, in fact, it has been sort of a trend now to work with memory, like different projects of artists dealing or taking up the issue of memory, either installation, graphic design, and a lot of them with photography, working with photography. So it has been a trend, and you have also documentary, feature films, and so on. Like many of them now are dealing with the issue of memory. So while the collaboration has been productive for art and activism, it has, on the other hand, raised serious questions for historians or for scholars in the humanities. Is the study of memory possible at all? If that's the case, if it's that complicated, no? Is it possible to conduct a study of memory? Because it's so elusive, it's so difficult to grapple. Yeah? The language is very limited. Our conceptual framework, once it's established, then you have like a new phenomena coming up. And you are sort of trying to catch up with these developments. You're trying to catch up with all these developments, and you, in many cases, actually fail. So is the study of memory possible at all? Or better, is it desirable? Do we want to make memory as an object of studies? Is this the best way to deal with that? Or are they more, or should we find like more diverse, collaborative attempts involving people from different backgrounds? For example, for historians, now you have like numerous journals devoted solely on the issue of memory. Psychology, history, anthropology, and humanities in general, area studies, etc. So what would be the best way to deal with this issue? This is a question that I raise to all of us. We have to think about it. Because what a study does is to capture a social and cultural phenomenon and present it in comprehensible terms. While memory work clearly goes further by interacting with the subject. Not only does this require a new set of concepts in order to capture the phenomenon better, but also new ways of placing the results of our study or our knowledge within a new set of social relationships. The rapid development of digital culture makes this task even more exciting, as it provides new ways of interacting. Yeah. Authoritative and official histories are increasingly getting irrelevant, and history and memory has been somewhat democratized. But there are new challenges now. Authoritative and official history are themselves based on the memory of the dominant group, while the status of their memories as official history has been undermined. It does not mean that their memories have been evaporated. The dominant is in fact reproduced by the excluded now. In the last few days, we have heard horrible news from Gaza, Palestine. Before I came here, I participated in a rally to support the Palestinian people. Not from our place was another rally, organized by an Islamist group and attended by the notorious presidential candidate, Prabowo Subianto, and people carrying flags of the equally notorious ISIS, yeah, the Syrian Iraqi Islamic State, which hit the news with their attack on Mecca. If nobody stops them, then they will arrive very soon. So their speeches were full of hate against Jews, stories about how Muslims have been repressed, etc. This is also a memory. Yeah. And they have this like separate, private, autonomous realm, yeah, where they cultivated these memories, yeah, in order to sort of build their movement. The whole movement is based on that. And the language is a language of hate and vengeance. They called for sending militias to the Middle East. Our rally was quite different, or very different in a sense. It was much more open, people from different religious groups attending, anti-globalization activists, street artists, people of different sorts. It was also colorful, a lot of singing, yeah. No dancing because it was fasting month. So, but we also condemned the bombing of Gaza by the Israeli state. We were also horrified. But there was no plans for sending any mission to the Middle East. We mobilized funds, but for educating more people in Indonesia so more people would know what is going on in Palestine. And here, we are employing the logic of interaction. Similar to Zapatista, Professor Nandy mentioned about the Zapatistas, their concept of solidarity, which is the best way to help the struggle of others is to wage your struggle at home. Because, and this is what we claimed in the rally, because after all of us are Palestinians. And this is the idea, if you go back to look at the memory and how to deal with that, the best way, I think, and is not to sort of help them to restore their memory, but to make this memory as part of your own. Yeah. So we are not doing that because we want other people to know, because we are part of that precise same history, although it happened somewhere else. As I said, we are all Palestinians. Thank you.
Before Gwen speaks, I have to introduce her a little. She's the first year Inter-Asia Cultural Studies student based here. And a group of us, a group of seven or eight, actually have in the last semester read Ashis' work altogether. So I figured, she may have a wider reading than some of the people here. And also she has been involved in the peasantry work. So please.
I have a big sense here. Good afternoon. I think some of people here know me. I'm Vicky Nguyen. I'm a student from Inter-Asia Cultural Studies program, University System of Taiwan, based in Jiao Tong University. It is really a great honor mixed up with a great anxiety for me to be one of the Professor Nandy's discussants. The school term in this spring, some friends and I joined a seminar course sources of the modern Asian thoughts, Ashis Nandy, organized by Guangxin. Reading Nandy for most of us was a very inspiring experience, but at the same time, suffering. Suffering because Professor Nandy is the kind of thinker, at least for me, whose idea was deeply rooted in the Indian or South Asian cultural historical context. Thus, to develop his interpretation and intervention of the Western categories and the modes of knowledge productions, Professor Nandy, through his methods of political psychology, utilized these resources of thoughts to deal with people's living conditions and psychological formations under the context of colonialism and Western secularized ways of modernization. I would say this becomes some sort of suffering or anxiety during the beginning period of our study group, precisely because we are encountering the unfamiliarity of those resources Professor Nandy inherited and built up the dialogue with. This includes such as Gandhi and Tagore's thoughts. Or to be more accurately, Gandhi and Tagore are seldomly treated as thinkers in Taiwan's academy field and school educations. This reveals our lacking of entering points to root or contextualize ourselves, thus led to the great difficulties for us to develop the process of knowledge productions beyond the Western theoretical frameworks and categories. Gradually, this creates detachments between knowledge and a sense of living realities. Say, memory among common people and community life would hardly be acknowledged as the resources of knowledge production. Not to mention memory work could be the methodology of practicing and producing knowledge. The effect would be our disability to delicately comprehend and deal with our feelings and the sense of living. Correspondingly, but in an ironic manner, we seem to share Lu Xun's accused knowledge conditions to some extent. Though the fortunate thing might be that it was the anxiety or feelings of suffering that we share within the study group instead of indifferences or comfort. For I consider this consistent intensity during reading Professor Nandy's work opens up certain spaces for self-reflection and recontextualization of our modes of thoughts, to borrow Guangxin's term, in relations within human living realities. Feelings and memories would be two of the vehicles to enter into the anonymous yet lively spaces. This is the moment when the experiment of that suffering gradually transformed to the resources for re-evaluation and possible imagination of not only the knowledge formation, but also the formation of the multiple selves. If we all agree that knowledge formation always have their grounded worldviews, and the scope of these worldviews never confine themselves within the nation-state framework and the discipline of the post-Enlightenment knowledge system. Therefore, to identify and relativize these worldviews would be the essential task in contemporary times. Enlightened from one of my instructors, Ying Bing from National Central University, he pinpointed out that the issue of knowledge formation is not merely about a subject that has been prohibited to be discussed or analyzed, but the critical point here is the closure of episteme, which blocks our attachment to people who have different worldviews compared to ours. It is that this worldview, which contain the holistic framework of the empirical knowledge and the local categories, and as the precondition or the base for discourses or knowledge productions to be possible. And most crucially, it is through the worldview that people define themselves and construct certain meanings to their everyday existence. At this plan, for example, we can see that there is a blockage that hinders certain intellectual or knowledge productions from getting in touch with the multiple worldviews and value systems derived from it, which people internalize as principles of social relations and living strategies. We should gradually limit ourselves within fragmented perspective and imaginations of our living realities, the past and the futures. And by doing so, we fail to acknowledge that there are multiple worldviews out there and that we might share certain links with the other worldviews. If we come to the understanding that our worldview might share some elements of other worldviews, we would arrive at the idea that no single worldview is self-sufficient. To speak further, how can it be possible for us to interpret and design a proper agenda of democracy, quote-unquote, and human freedom based on and in dialogue with the empirical experiences if we fail to have an empathetic understanding and the interlink of feelings with the community life in the village and the people who live at the periphery or outside the normative domain of modernity. Furthermore, how can we get to realize or at least to move step forwards to people's psychological, emotional, and physical conditions for whom themselves and their ways of remembering and living with the past have been objectified and alienated from history? This idea from Professor Nandy is what inspires me the most. To identify memory as one form of to identify history as one form of memory work, which tend to go along with the certain ideological demands, such as the nationalist narrative of its past, as well as certain modes of history that follows the teleological or evolutionary logic, is just one part of the story. I would like to suggest here that we should at the same time acknowledge that there are still multiple ways of memory works which intertwine with the trajectories of memory, anti-memories, and non-memories that dynamically constitute the so-called cultural memories, which are shareable and revisable within a community, and are able to function as resources of self as well as cultural expressions, and as referential system of knowledge productions. In short, it could be the fundamental infrastructure of the formation of the self and the reproduction of cultural traditions that people rely upon. Here I would like to share some stories to try to develop the dialogue with Professor Nandy. Here's my story. Taiwan indigenous people, in Mandarin is 原住民, tend to be mobilized as one of the major symbols within Taiwan ethno-nationalist historical narrative. Among the history discourses during my high school years, they were divided into categories of Chinese history, which the course title is simply put as history, the history of Taiwan, and the world history. I remember vividly that the stories of Taiwan indigenous people are always about the history of oppression, from the migration to Han Chinese people in Ming Dynasty to Japan's colonial period. But after the national government officially retreated to Taiwan in 1949, it seems that the history of oppression experienced among different groups of people is either negated or marginalized in the history text of school educations. This negation or marginalization within the historical narrative consequently leads to the silencing of those memories, carrying the experiences of suppression and the oppressed people's resistance. It was during the counter-movement and alleged democratization trend, along with the suspension of martial laws in the late 1980s, that the characterization of the four ethnic groups, which includes indigenous people, 原住民, Hakka, 客家人, Hoklo, 福建人, 闽南人, and the mainlanders, 外省人, become a source of political mobilization. And this leads to the hypersensitive divisions among Taiwan society and the relations with mainland China. I won't go on with this problematic of this ethnic categorization, but there's one thing should be noted here. The categorization of the four ethnic groups was legitimized in the legal framework and put into the historical narrative of school educations under the name of multiculturalism. This camouflage of multiculturalism is, in term of the ethnic, oftentimes cover increasingly intensity within Taiwan society, especially when the politics of ethnicity always intertwine with the electoral and party politics. Roughly speaking, this could be seen as the historical process of restructuring of relations between the Taiwan states, political parties, which I'm referring to KMT and DPP, and the society after the political democratization movements in the 90s. On the other hand, the creating of ethnicity required the creating of certain historical narrative in order to legitimize the existence of it. It is arguable that this characterization of ethnicity implies the legitimization of certain historical trajectories of the Taiwan state building process, to borrow Luo Yongsheng's term, embodies the politics of temporality in terms of state building. But besides that, there's the subtext of that nationality as Taiwanese, which is situated prior to these four categories. And the sequence of this ethnicity implies the hierarchical relations within this nationality as Taiwanese. In other words, indigenous people are regarded as the most authentic Taiwanese, and the least is the 外省人. What is in between within this hierarchy is the very complex issue of the so-called native Taiwanese people, 本省人, and then other province people from mainland China, 外省人. And I will not discuss it here, but I would like to problematize the issue of Taiwan indigenous people, 原住民, as an ethno category by sharing my observations and thoughts during my one career year in the urban ghetto of the indigenous people at the outskirts of Hsinchu city in 2012. Taiwan's indigenous people, in the sense of the ethno category as well as their tribal life, are characterized as certain modes of social relations, have constantly been mobilized as either the cultural theme in the Taiwan nationalist historical discourses and the cultural pluralism paradigm, or as the subject for many anthropologies. In Taiwan nationalist historical narratives, it is the oppression and the resistance against the Japanese colonial regime as well as the national governments under the KMT regime that have been documented as historical archive. In other words, the characteristic of the oppression and resistance have been framed by certain ideological purpose. That is to delegitimize both the Japanese colonial regime and KMT, for they were or are the outsiders in Taiwan. What needs to be identified here is, this implies and provides precondition of letting Taiwanese rule themselves. However, peculiarly, what seems to be the most authentic Taiwanese, the Taiwan indigenous people, have never been able to achieve the self-rule within their own communities. What's worse is that many of them have been uprooted from their cultural traditions since the migration from the tribe to the city along the historical process of industrialization and urbanization. Many of them came to the city to find temporary works, such as construction workers, since the 1980s, and still others did the low-level part-time jobs. Some of their temporary habitat located at the periphery of the city has confronted the serious threats by the local governments and real estate companies for the past 1 decade because of the rapid urban expansions and renewal projects. They are the kind of Taiwanese who has lived in the multiple structures of oppression and suffering along the historical process. But only few of those collective experiences and memories have been written down in the history of Taiwan. Perhaps not that surprisingly, their memories and the trajectories of subject formations, along with their migrations from tribe to the city, have been excluded in the national history. It is suspicious that their experience of suffering, discrimination, and exploitation along the process of migration, which were contained in their memories, might shatter the legitimacy of both modernization projects activated by the states and the Western egalitarianism, which is expressed in the language of multiculturalism. The erasure of these memories in the grand historical narrative, on one hand, gradually developed into a kind of perception that those days of staying at the periphery of the city are merely regarded as exceptions in their life. The reality is that most of them have spent over 10 years in the temporary habitat, and many of them keep migration from cities to cities. It is this living with uncertainty and intensity in terms of livelihood and psychic conditions that accumulated into their memories and thus structure their feelings and perceptions toward the surrounded world. This formation of the worldview constructed through memories and feelings is embodied in the process of migration and the everyday life experiences in the urban ghetto, has consequently affected how they situate themselves in relation with the tribe, which they have the sense of belonging but cannot or do not desire to go back, the city, which they can find the sense of belonging only through modernize or individualize themselves, and the urban ghetto, which their sense of belonging and collectiveness are built on the uncertain and intensive living conditions. Some have dreamed to go back to their tribe in the future because that is where their memories could be legitimized and respected, and have the language or expressions to be shared with. It is also where their memories and the empirical and oral inherited knowledge to be provided as the resources of their cultural self-esteem and sense of belongings. However, sadly, this is almost merely the imagination. For many of them know well that it's always difficult when encountering livelihood issues in terms of economic in the tribe, especially among the younger generations. To put it straight, they can barely make a living and gain self-value if they remain in the tribe within the current economical and social surroundings. The geographical distance between tribes and the cities in Taiwan leads to the scale of national modernization, which I was inspired from Teiju's talk yesterday. And urbanization almost equal to the converge of Taiwan Island. One side of the coin would be that the rural village, the tribal life, and as well as all communities in the city are encountering the severe threats of not just their existence, but also their memories and cultural traditions accumulated within those spaces, which enable the collective cultural practices that would perform and reproduce. What I'm trying to suggest here is that as long as the urban ghetto and the living experiences in it are regarded as the exceptions, either of the city or of the biography among those who reside in it, it will therefore lead to a gradual silencing or rejecting of memories back in their tribe. The rejection to acknowledge the living realities in the ambiguous space, such as the urban ghetto, by these indigenous people, will likely to disconnect themselves from the memories and social relations in the tribe. This psychic formation, which is derived from the process of negating certain parts of the memory, would often lead to the negation of the other related memories. Say, if you cannot psychologically situate yourself within the urban ghetto and legitimize it as part of your life instead of exceptionalizing it, the memories back in the tribe would make life in the ghetto even more unbearable, and thus leads to the alienation from yourself and the negation of the memories in the urban ghetto. A compartmentalizing of memories would segment the formation of the selves, and thus leads to the vivisectional selves. In reality, it is difficult for these indigenous people to accumulate their memories in the ghetto, and thus to develop into or renew the cultural traditions due to the life there is overwhelmed with suspicions, uncertainties, insecurities, humiliations, and sufferings. To borrow a term from Professor Nandy, this condition might be read as the operation of that principle of the principle of forgetfulness. But what would be the baseline of that principle? Would it be possible that the principle of forgetfulness functions along with the erasure of memories by the political forces? These experiences in urban ghetto pushed me to reconsider the term indigenous people, 原住民, for this ethno category has been framed within certain historical discourses which seem to be irrelevant to people's living conditions and the formation of the selves. And it is also because of this ethno category and its interrelated historical narratives that block out our view to look into the trajectories and dynamics of the political cultural shift along the historical process between people who live in the tribe and the migration from the tribe to the city and their living conditions at the periphery of the city. Concerning that, human tends to build up their worldviews and systems of value inherited from cognitions and interpretations of the world they live in. This would be different from the humanistic perspective toward the issue of human living conditions, which tend to detach individuals from their situated social relations. The memories and the anti-memories of these alleged indigenous people, 原住民, in the urban ghetto should be recognized as and be part of the memories of the city as well as the tribes. In short, the hybridity of memories is the reality. This might be the critical punch toward the nationalist screening of memories. It is through this recognition that enables us to open up our sensibility to track through the trajectories of the human living biographies, which we might find the clues of how the worldviews and the system of values are being bred by the mechanism of memory work. At this point, memory work would be the work of knowledge production, which provide resources for us to critically rethink the issue of the creation of an ethnicity within the context of nationalization, national modernization, and urbanization, by taking up the issue of the indigenous people in urban ghetto as the entering point. This work is not just aiming at deconstruction of indigenous people as ethnic category, but to, in the language of Mexican intellectual and grassroots activist Gustavo Esteva, which actually I was quoted from Professor Nandy's work as well, to regenerate people's space. To sum up, this text would not just to tackle with the issue of human living conditions or the memory work waiting to be analyzed or theorized, but to reclaim the sites where the realities of human living conditions and their memories are able to be acknowledged through the self-acknowledgement. Thank you.